Everybody, welcome to your AEW Revolution post-show. I am John Pollock, joined by Wai Ting, moments removed from tonight's Revolution pay-per-view at the Chase Center in San Francisco, California. How are you doing tonight, Wai?
Doing pretty well, John. How are you?
I'm doing great. I just watched a phenomenal show. I thought that was just an extraordinary pay-per-view overall.
Yeah. And I don't think any of us ever doubted it. You know, like these shows are usually pretty high level. We were critical, as were a lot of people, about the build to this. But I think when it came to bell, no surprise. But, you know, just how good this Ironman match was in particular, maybe I didn't even expect.
There were several. I thought that, honestly, I feel this was one of AEW's best pay-per-views. I thought that they over-delivered on many fronts. If you want to go with, I mean, the matches, like to me, there were no matches that did not hit. I would say at the bottom would be, I think Joe Wardlow had a very difficult time in there. But by the end of the night, I actually thought that what they did in that match was actually great. And then you had the women's match that I thought the crowd was into that one like quite a bit. And I guess your reaction is going to come down to the angle afterwards, if you like that direction or not. But overall, I thought that this pay-per-view over-delivered in terms of what I was expecting pretty much across the board. Like I had a pretty high expectation level, but man, and not to be lost, I thought that the 8-match format and one on the 0 hour, I thought that was a great format. I found it to be a big difference. I know that it was unique circumstances with an Ironman match, and we might not see this again, but for all that we talk about of there's so many people and we've got to get them television time, there's also the argument that for a big show like this to spread things out, I found there was not an ounce that dragged for me on this show. And I was curious because over the last year, the match totals, and this includes pre-shows, were 12, 13, 13, 15 for Double or Nothing last September, and 13 for Full Gear. We had 9 total tonight, including the pre-show.
Yeah. I don't know if I see the content length changing a whole lot. I mean, this wasn't it similar? Like
it was the same length, but I found it to be a lot different when, 2 or 3 matches are down and I know that there's not like 12 ahead of us at the same time. Listen, I don't know if they're going to stick to this, but I found it to be, it just to me felt a lot more spread out, and it wasn't as though they just dragged stuff either. I just felt it was as well. You focus in on, like, you had stories for all of this. Your thoughts on it might vary in terms of the quality of it, but I think it also it just worked to me a lot better as a 9-match show as opposed to a 13-match show.
Certainly, yeah. I think we've been wanting that for a long time. Something tells me that they're going to want to keep the lengths of the shows at this at the same ballpark, and I think that will probably mean adding more matches. You had a 65-minute match tonight, but tonight I think just there's something to be said and something to be learned by sort of like the mental economy that I think, a 13-match card demands of an audience versus a 9-match card. That just kind of mental exhaustion of knowing that you have to sit through. You never want a match to feel like you have to sit through it in order to get somewhere else. So it's like an album that's like, a 10-track and all killer, no filler versus, a double album with a lot of stuff you don't really care about.
Would you have wanted to sit down for a 200-lap race today in Bahrain?
200? No, not necessarily, unless that was, well, you know what, like if that was like the novelty, hey, for one night only, all these teams are going to race for 200 laps. Let's see the exhaustion that, like, are there oxygen tanks that'll be provided, in the cars? I mean, if it's a special attraction, then the answer is yes.
I don't need a 200-lap race, but anyway, we will get into.
But would you have, like, a lot of people said that about the Ironman match. I don't know how excited, the general audience was for an Ironman match when it was announced.
Well, that crowd they were into it there was no loss of that audience through those 65 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as of just before the show, WrestleTix had reported 9,000 tickets out. So they did move a significant amount of tickets in the last 24 hours. Didn't sell out the Chase Center, but nonetheless, a great crowd. They were into everything on this show. There were no lulls, and in some cases, I thought they lifted up some matches, but it was a great crowd in San Francisco tonight.
Very much so. It was a crowd that I think recognized that they were seeing something pretty special in a rare AEW pay-per-view. And I think especially that main event relied upon them to feel like it was a success, and they completely played their part.
You know why they were in great spirits? Because as they're leaving the Chase Center now, it's 9 p.m. The whole night is ahead of them.
It's the benefit of the West Coast, isn't it?
The 0 hour, it was definitely the most unique 0 hour because unlike what we assumed that they would throw in some other matches at the last minute, they left it to just the 6-man, and the rest of it was anchored by Renee Paquette and RJ City. And it very much felt like that WrestleMania 37 with the rain delay, where various talent got to go out and be interviewed, and it felt completely improvised to the point that it felt as though the wrestlers being interviewed had no idea what they were going to be asked, and you could see like the wheels turning on some of them. I found it to be really unique to see, number one, how people would take to different performers in these scenarios, who they relied upon, and also putting RJ City in a pretty big spot on the pre-show, which I guess your opinion of him is going to vary based on if you're familiar with his content online with AEW and if that's what you want on a pre-show. But I thought that it added certainly levity to the pre-show, and you juxtapose that with Renee. But I thought it was certainly a worthwhile experiment to do something different. That AEW shows, it's cram as much wrestling content into whatever window we have. And this was the opposite, where wrestling was a sidebar of this pre-show, and it was mainly promos building up the pay-per-view.
Yeah. I thought it was really encouraging to see them do something like this. We had been talking about Ring of Honor. We'd been talking about really Rampage, and I think the general style of a Tony Khan show that's not Dynamite. Dynamite is an exception because, he makes time for like storyline and promos and things like that on that show. But for all of his other properties, including the 0 hour, they tend to be wall-to-wall, like action. And that, I think, fits in line with like... maybe, the taste of a guy who grew up as a tape trader and really just kind of prefers action. Unfortunately, especially for something like a kickoff show and a buy-in that, in my opinion, is designed to try to get people who are on the fence about catching up to your shows, catching up to your storylines, and getting them excited for the shows. Wall-to-wall action, I don't think does anything for that. Having one match with a purpose, which we got, I thought, tonight. I thought that helped, and I think showcasing personality and talking up the matches helped. Now, WWE does this, of course. They spend their entire kickoffs talking about the matches, but for a good reason. Like, you could skip those entirely and not feel like you missed anything, and that's because those conversations tend to be pretty dry with personalities that, like, might be okay at, like, talking about a kayfabe storyline, but they're not really interesting. You got real performance on this particular buy-in, and performance in the form of, like, guys going out there and playing characters and improvising the way they would on Talking Smack, or like, even like a Raw Talk and things like that. Like the best type of, I think, talking only show that you could get, with the added purpose of showcasing personality and also building up to the matches that you're going to see on the pay-per-view. Yes,
it became comedy bar for 45 of these 60 minutes.
Yeah. I love the fact that they're finally giving RJ City a bigger push, beyond just AEW. I think he's, to me, like, part of the reason why I wanted to pay attention to all of these interviews was to kind of see how performers would react to him. And because I knew he wasn't just going to do a straight up, like, joining me at this time type of interview. You weren't going to get that a lot. But I will say, like, I feel like they need to find a better balance of, like, how much comedy to do. Like, I thought they kind of went to him with him doing comedy a little too much. And I thought there was maybe a little too much shtick, at times when, especially for, like, I thought it was a bit of an awkward transition going from, like, Adam Cole doing AEW to, like, him cutting a serious promo. So I think
and maybe you find a better balance of who works, because if you're going to use RJ, you should be using him for that is his unique skill set and how you view him. And maybe if you don't want to go that route with, say, an Adam Cole, that's what Renee should be there for, to be the interview there. You can have more fun with a Powerhouse Hobbs, or if it's Orange Cassidy and Danhausen, or like you have a range of characters, and Like I don't want the two Renee and RJ to be identical. You want to have that range.
True. But I also feel like RJ is probably like, you and I know, like he's talented enough that he could probably play a more serious side to himself as well. And he could probably transition, like from needing to be jokey when he needs to setting the stage and giving the spotlight for the talent to actually, sell a story. So I look forward to seeing this format evolve. Like this was like a first attempt, and I think very successful for the most part.
I liked it. It was something different. And as well, the one match, they did it relatively early. This was like 15 minutes into the show, which threw Tony Schiavone for a loop because as we start this 6-man, he's like, we're 15 minutes away from the pay-per-view, and Excalibur has to correct him. We're actually 15 minutes into the pre-show. We have 45 minutes until the pay-per-view, and Schiavone's just probably giving him the middle finger on the air. So it is Mark Briscoe and the Lucha Brothers with Alex Abrahantes against Ari Daivari, Josh Woods, and Tony Nese. They have Mark Sterling in their corner, the Lucha Brothers in their 49ers colors. And Sterling does his introduction of his team as they come out into the spotlights. And Mark Briscoe was very popular in this match, and a lot of the match was built around him. But some great stuff here from the Lucha Brothers, including a maiden Penta onto Tony Nese. Sterling gets onto the apron and tossed into the ring by Penta, and he goes for a package pile driver on Sterling, but is saved by Nese. And Woods catches Phoenix's Tornillo with a knee strike in midair, hits a corkscrew suplex into the corner. Woods does, sending Phoenix. And then we get the Mark Briscoe getting crotched on the turnbuckle. There's a Tower of Doom spot by the Lucha Brothers, and then Tony Nese hits the 450 on Briscoe. The Lucha Brothers make the save, and then we get a near fall on Mark Briscoe, who is still alive in the match. The crowd starts chanting, "Them boys," and it ends with a Fear Factor gory special combo by Penta with Phoenix's assistance to both Daivari and Nese, and then setting up Mark Briscoe to hit Froggy Bow and pin Ari Daivari in 12 minutes and 50 seconds. I thought a very fun opener and our lone match on the pre-show.
I thought it was like a really good choice of an exhibition match on a free show. Number one, it was really hot and guaranteed to be really hot with the Lucha Brothers and a Mark Briscoe involved. I thought you had a really good heel team that, like are a team that you just kind of want to see get beaten up, by your fan favorites in the varsity, what are they called now? Varsity athletes. 3 baby faces that are incredibly over, no real storyline implications, but I don't really think you need that for a kickoff match. The value of this is to showcase your guys that will hopefully be some of the main characters heading into your next show, and that includes, of course, the Lucha Brothers and definitely Mark Briscoe. I felt this was a really good match to really just kind of showcase him, because you would expect that he'd be one of the focal points of not just ROH but AEW as well.
Yeah, you got a lot of great stuff here. I was very impressed this week with Josh Woods between Ring of Honor, which I know it was taped last weekend, but nonetheless, he had the match this week on TV, and then his role in this 6-man as well. Tony Nese is a really great wrestler. He gets a lot of flack because he doesn't stand out in a big way, but he's very talented. And Mark Briscoe, a tremendous live event performer that this audience was all gravitating towards. And then you throw in the Lucha Brothers here. It made for a really nice mix. You didn't have to have a deep setup for this. It was a promo on TV after several attacks by the varsity athletes to lead to this. So nice opener, and they didn't crowd it with any other matches. There's a fear factor that they delivered to Mark Sterling afterwards, so maybe a lawsuit will be coming.
Oh, one can only hope.
And that maybe he'll try and sue for the contracts of the Lucha Brothers.
Yes, right.
So some of the highlights of the interviews, we had RJ City with Matt Menard, Angelo Parker, and Daniel Garcia, and RJ had to feel Menard's nipples, and because he cannot be ringside for Jericho's match, his nipples are soft tonight. Angelo Parker, his hair is a mess. This is really causing him problems. And Daniel Garcia was wearing velour, and he says that velour is soft, but not as soft as Ricky Starks. And after Jericho wins tonight, they're going to have the celebration of a lifetime when Jericho walks in at the end of the promo. So I imagine Jericho was just like directing this, or just standing there watching these guys cut a promo, and then just walked in at the end of it. So they were under the gun here to deliver a promo.
How'd that feel? Yeah.
Tony Storm was not playing along at the beginning. There's the yes and method, and she was like asked like these questions at the beginning. She's like, I'm not answering that, and RJ's just got to keep going here. But then this leads to a segment where Tony spray paints RJ's what looked to be a very nice leather jacket that looks ruined as a result of this, unless he joins DX or something.
I don't imagine he would have worn this leather jacket unless it was going to be spray painted.
Well, maybe this was Tony Storm's improv.
Yeah, maybe on some level. I think like, even when watching like, certain people on AEW, you could tell like what are the personalities that I think fit well within that sort of format and which aren't. And I think for a Tony Storm, like a person who I think is still really trying to find who her heel character is, to kind of put her in like a comedic situation where she also has to play heel, she definitely looked uncomfortable, and this might be a situation where like it's not so beneficial to have this style of interview with her.
Renee interviewed Britt Baker, kind of just focused on All Access and the women's title match, and then RJ is with Powerhouse Hobbs, and he's asking about the ring, and he said, "Can I see it? It's really big." And Hobbs played along here. I actually thought this was a funny bit that they did, and still kept the aura of Powerhouse Hobbs as RJ is asking him, "What's in the book?" And Hobbs like, "Do you want to be in the book?" "No, not if it's something bad. I don't want to be in the book. I'll be an excerpt on the back of the book." Hobbs, I thought this one was really funny, and I thought Hobbs got to showcase some personality.
Hobbs plays along really well. I recommend the AEW with him and Ricky Starks. The both of them I thought were excellent, like in this sort of setting. Yeah.
And then Sanjay Dutt came out for a bit with Renee, and essentially he said, "The suit I'm wearing now, I'm going to have a different suit for the pay-per-view," which later he came out like in all like Indian attire with a turban, and he had said his family was here at the arena. So anyway, that was Sanjay's contribution here. And then Shivani, at the end of near the end, explains the rules of the final burial, which we'll get to when we get to the match. And it ended with, as Wai mentioned earlier, Adam Cole being interviewed after the All Access trailer. And he explains how you're going to see my whole journey that I went through to come back from my concussion. You'll hear from my friends and family, but most of all, the fans deserve to see my comeback. And RJ follows up, "Do they get to see you go to the bathroom?" And Adam Cole just turns to the camera and says that he is not going to share who his opponent will be March 29th, but he is going to run AEW, take it to places it has never gone before, and nothing will stand in his way. And this became a very serious promo at the end by Adam Cole.
Yeah, this is where I especially felt like tonally, I don't think it really worked, nor do I feel like Adam Cole, should be. We should be thinking about like him in the bathroom, when he's trying to like talk about his very emotional comeback as he's trying to set up this interview, this big promo towards the end. So I listen, I like the direction and I like the risks that they're taking now with this show. It's making this show actually interesting and worth watching. I think they just need to work on the balance between the comedy and the serious a bit more.
All right. As we get into the main show, I want to thank everyone that is joining us live on the YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel. That is your admission here. And for our members at postwrestlingcafe.com, you have a call-in link that we will be going to your calls after the review of Revolution. So
also video.postwrestling.com for those of you that are video patrons. Just go to the membership tab. You'll find the call-in link. We'll be taking your calls as soon as we're done the review.
Yes, we are live after every show and back Monday night following Raw for those that are stumbling upon here and realizing, hey, wait a minute, how did I get here? Well, you're here for life now. Main card starts off with Jim Ross joining Excalibur and Taz. So this seems to be the pay-per-view format way is Jim Ross does half the show, and then he was in with Shivani. Shivani flipped with Jim Ross midway through. Yeah. Chris Jericho is in the opening spot on the pay-per-view, taking on Ricky Starks. And it is Jericho. The Jericho Appreciation Society is banned from ringside. And you noticed that this had been an updated graphic that they put out.
Well, yeah, the initial graphic had said everybody was banned from ringside. They specifically changed it to the JAS is banned from ringside. So I was definitely expecting non-JAS members to interfere. We kind of didn't get we kind of got both, but neither. Like, we got a JS member interfering, and a non-JAS interview thing.
And then he was cut off. It was almost as though they were teasing you with some kind of screwy finish, but then they stopped it from happening, and we got the ending that we did. But a lot of this match was built around Ricky Stark's injured ribs, that he comes into the match with them taped up. Crowd is chanting, "Let's go, Ricky, Y2J," after Jericho misses it with a lion salt, and all of Jericho's offense is on the ribs. Double underhook backbreaker, even going for the lion salt, which he just did. Then baseball slides to drop kicks, and Jim Ross notes that I was born just up the street from here. And Taz comes back, so the Oklahoma thing was a work? And that is a trivia note, that Jim Ross was actually born in California and not Oklahoma, as most people would assume. Yes.
Interesting.
The superplex by Jericho gets blocked, and he goes back with a knee to the ribs and a Death Valley driver by Jericho. Starks then comes back with a power bomb, and he leapfrogs Jericho, goes for the spear, and is caught with a code breaker. Strong near fall by Jericho. And then after Jericho misses an axe handle, Starks lands the spear, Jericho kicks out, and then it is Starks missing with the moonsault and is put into the walls of Jericho, attacking the ribs, and Starks breaks out of the hold and gets into a single leg crab, which might have been the submission maneuver of the night at Revolution. This is when Sammy Guevara runs down, and he gets tackled out of nowhere by Action Andretti, who sent this guy into another state. And with Aubrey Edwards distracted with the two on the floor, Jericho gets the bat, hits Starks in the ribs, and goes for the Judas effect, but Starks blocks the Judas effect, and then holds on to the wrist of Jericho, lifts him up for Rochambeau, and it is a clean 1-2-3 for Ricky Starks in 13 minutes and 50 seconds. Hot crowd to start, clean finish, and it's the idea of teasing that Jericho was going to get the win here, and then taking people on that ride at the end, and Starks gets the definitive win that should put an end to this program.
I thought a very solid opener. I thought placement, it worked out really well. I mean, I think this match every match would have been pretty successful, but obviously I wonder if you place this one after Texas Death, how it would have gone. I think still pretty good, but I think placing it in the opener certainly made it feel more special. This was a crowd that was really amped up and ready to watch this. I thought it was pretty straightforward, overall, a pretty straightforward babyface win for Starks. I love the way he blocked the Judas with just this sort of karate, taekwondo type of block. I've never seen it done like that, and I thought it was pretty novel. Perfectly fine match, and, the only way you can go, because Starks is your project, and he needed to definitively beat Jericho, even if it meant it was a second time. I guess at the end of this, you wonder if the first win was all that beneficial. I think you're also maybe left wondering, in the future, does AEW continue to spend an entire pay-per-view cycle on one particular feud, or are there lessons to be learned from how people criticize this towards the end about it lasting a little too long? Should this have been broken up a little bit more? Should you have delayed the feud like this a little bit more? Because as I think satisfying as the match ended up being, I'm still left kind of wondering if it was, worth all that time to finally get here.
Well, I mean, the other argument to that is, number one, you're dealing with these longer pay-per-view cycles where it's not as though you can just wrap things up quickly. You could have wrapped this up on television. The other is that, especially for a pay-per-view like this, where to begin with, your pay-per-view slots are limited, and this one, you have even less matches. Jericho is going to be on a program for your pay-per-view. So if not paired with Jericho, does Ricky Starks get lost somewhere else? At least he was attached here to someone of note, and it's a second win over Jericho. The hope would be that this program has at least kept Starks at a high enough level post MJF program that you see him he's at an elevated level now.
I suppose the argument would be to delay the feud. If your ultimate destination is Starks and Jericho at the pay-per-view, then you start maybe a little bit later rather than, as soon as they did. But, we've seen programs that last multiple, a whole year that are successful. So maybe it's just more of a criticism of the actual build itself. I thought it started off really strong, the entire program. Certainly, felt a bit flat towards the end, but I thought this was a satisfying end for it all.
For all we wanted to say on our preview about getting some baby faces up and running for MJF. Like coming out of this show, you have a lot of babyface options from Omega, Jack Perry, Ricky Starks. It's like you do have quite a lot of different options.
It's more so on the heel side, actually.
Yeah, that might have been actually our discussion, is maybe the heel side as I'm thinking about it now. So
like, who are the heels now for all these baby faces to face?
If you listen, like some of the, like outside of MJF, some of like the biggest heel reactions are for Jarrett, Christian, and Jericho, which are like your older performers that are, they know all the tricks of the trade, but there's also sort of that dynamic with the audience of these people taking up big spots on the show that I think works to an audience as well. But you're right. It's, unless they're looking at going that direction with a Moxley and BCC as a whole.
Right. Yeah, they are actually. So
that kind of shores up your sort of, secondary heel underneath an MJF. The final burial was the second match on the card, Christian Cage and Jack Perry. So as we assume, this was a buried alive match. There was a casket out by ringside.
It was more of a casket match than a buried alive match.
Well,
there was no real digging that was done.
But we had dirt. We did have dirt.
Yes. So sort of a combination of the two. Yeah.
It was a what could we call this? Maybe
the final burial.
The final burial. So I happened to look this up because I was curious. Do you know that yesterday was the anniversary of Luke Perry's passing?
No. Wow. That explains a whole lot, like of Jungle Boy's motivation tonight. Wow.
Well, he was definitely making like these signals. When he came out, he like looks at the grave and he's like he's sort of like nodding, and then when he puts Cage into it, like he was certainly playing that up, but they never made that part of the story, even though Luke Perry himself was brought up in all of this, to like Jungle Boy cutting a promo on Friday that you can go say hi to my dad for me, but they never brought that up. And I was watching the match just curious and looked it up, and it's March 4th, 2019 he passed away.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, could have been a personal choice, like, where they didn't want to be so blatant about it, or who knows. But okay, that certainly adds to, some of his reactions tonight.
Christian is out in his new wrestling attire of a black turtleneck sleeveless shirt. So if Steve Jobs had ever become a pro wrestler, this would have been the look.
Yeah, sans like blue jeans, and like white sneakers, but yeah, pretty much. I love that. Like even in a street fight, the guy has to keep the turtleneck on. It's a wonderful heel trait.
Perry is just in your traditional jeans and cowboy boots, and Cage is running through the audience. Jungle Boy fights up into the stands with him, and then they're fighting on the ramp and eventually return to the ring, and Cage blows a kiss to Perry's mother and sister, who are front row watching, and he does a spot where he steps on Jungle Boy's hair and pulls him by the arms, and Cage then whips him with his belt. This is after Perry had smashed Christian's head into the steps, which was one of the angles that they did, busting open Christian. So this was did you keep count of how many people bled on this show? Because this was our first juice of the night.
I'm guessing it was like 4, somewhere in that vicinity.
Yeah. How many liters were donated tonight by the AEW roster? I think MJF provided us about a quart in the final match.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he's Cage takes over, whipping him with the belt. Then he's choking him with it, and they make their way up the stage. The casket is opened, and inside of the casket are 2 chairs. So Cage brings them out, and he gets nailed by Jungle Boy, and Cage is sent off the stage, and Jungle Boy follows with a cannonball splash off this stage. And now it is Jungle Boy with the chair, but he is kicked in the balls, and Jungle Boy gets rammed into the casket, and he's put into the casket, but stops from the lid being shut. The kill switch is then hit onto the dirt, and he places the chair for the concerto, but Jungle Boy gets out of the way, and Cage gets a chair. Jungle Boy gets a shovel, and Cage starts choking him with the shovel after taking it. Jungle Boy then reverses, and Cage gouges the eye, and Cage gets the shovel. And dude, he swung for the fences with this shovel. And it had to have been, listen, you better duck, because if not, your head's coming off. He swung this so hard, and it was not a lot of margin here for Jungle Boy to duck this thing. I would have been like, no, man, or at least get your hand up or something, but they timed it well. But had they not, this would have been adding to the blood donation list of the night. So after ducking the shovel shot, he applies the snare trap using the shovel, very Edge-esque with the piece of the chair, and positions Christian for the concerto. But before he can hit it, he looks up to the sky and then hits the concerto, rolls Christian into the casket, gives Christian, I guess, his last rites, kisses him on the forehead, slams the lid shut, and the casket drops into the grave, and the match is over at 14 minutes and 50 seconds.
It was a pretty quick drop, like the type of drop.
Dude, it was like the drop zone. Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine that. Like, imagine being like, that's scary. Like being shut inside a casket, and you're just suddenly feeling like a straight drop onto something. So it almost looked like, I don't know if it was like intentionally like set up that way, but it looked pretty cool by the end. This was a really good match. It really was.
They had to work with a very tough gimmick, like the buried alive casket match stipulation. Like it was going to be tough, and you didn't want this to come off as hokey or comedic, and they just worked it as a violent, intense fight that had a definitive ending. And I would say at the end of this, like, it was guaranteed, like, the loser has to go away. This felt like the end of Christian Cage.
Completely. Like, this felt like a goodbye. I don't know if it gets more definitive than, like, kissing a man on his forehead as you shut the coffin and he's
like, you don't come
buried.
back from this.
No. And considering the fact that, like, he's perfectly healthy, also the fact that, like, it is, like, what, 2 years since he's
so you brought this up, so I was looking it up, and I mean, at the time, he only said it was a multi-year deal, and he was here for the long haul. So it could totally have been a 2-year deal. Like, that is definitely possible, and it's only going to fuel speculation that that you have the chance of getting Finn Balor and Damian Priest against Edge and Christian.
Wow, I didn't even jump to that, but that is very interesting. Yeah, so that's very possible. It'll be really interesting to see where Christian ends up, but he certainly went out with a bang here. I thought this was, for a match that I feel like was kind of rushed in reheating, and the stipulation that really just kind of came out of nowhere. Like they're fighting. All of a sudden, we see this like gothy, like emo video from Jungle Boy with Christian's name on a tombstone. For how quickly they kind of set up this stipulation without that much sort of context attached to it, I thought this match ended up really well, and it was a really good storytelling type of match. And I ultimately feel like that's the biggest lesson working with Christian Cage has given Jungle Boy. You had in Jungle Boy a guy with all the athleticism in the world, able to pull off just these incredible action-based matches even before he got into AEW. But this Christian feud and this connection, and I think has really made him into a really well-rounded performer. This was a match that almost felt like a movie scene at parts, where he had to do a lot of playing to the crowd, a lot of like emoting of like what he was going through in his mind, and knowing that real life detail, John, I'm sure he used that as motivation here. But even without knowing it, this was a guy who he had looked to as a surrogate for his own father, as a father figure, and he ended up being somebody who turned on him and insulted his father and insulted his family in front of him. So all of that rage and all of that motivation was kind of bottled up into this particular match. And that final concerto and then that final shutting of the casket both felt very cathartic, because I thought both of them did such a great job conveying the story, especially Christian in the promos and especially Jungle Boy in the body of this match. So I certainly feel like Jungle Boy in a match like this was elevated to a different level that made him ultimately a more well-rounded and complete professional wrestler.
This had a lot of difficulties with the Christian injury throwing a wrench into the plan, having to do that quick match back at All Out. But I think for a lot of this story, if you just kind of isolate the key beats of the story and summarize it, I think it works out to be like a pretty well thought out program designed to get Jungle Boy to the next level. And I think coming out of this, you have that best chance to, like, this is a guy that comes out of this and could easily challenge MJF for a title, and be in a position to be a key babyface at this point. Like, this is going to be a very pivotal period for Jack Perry now that this feud is over.
I agree that he could challenge. I don't know how many people would buy a win from Jungle Boy just yet. Feels like he might still be like a year or at least a few big wins away from that. But a challenge, I think, would probably be an attractive TV match.
And yeah, with Christian, like it remains to be seen like what his status is, because just how definitive this was. I mean, this just does not seem like a character that was designed to be coming back. My curiosity is if on Wednesday, Tony Schiavone interviews Jack Perry in the ring and says, Jack, I was given this video and I wanted to play it for you. And it's Christian Cage on video stating, Jack, if you're seeing this video, I had to do this on purpose. And he filmed this a year ago stating, listen, I wanted to bring out the killer that I knew was inside of you. I didn't know that you would mean it literally, but I know that if you're watching this, things did not turn out for me. And this was all my plan to get you to show that killer instinct that I knew I could unlock from you. And I couldn't do it as your mentor. I had to do it as your adversary. So farewell.
Yeah.
That Regal video is going to live in infamy in my memory.
That's like sort of like one big aspect of this entire like Bryan MJF build that I think they choose to forget selectively. They certainly shy away from bringing it up too often, but I thought that was pretty poorly handled. And in hindsight,
Schiavone didn't even want to call the Regal stretch. He's like, "Oh, the label lock." It's like, "Oh, it's for his mentor." Excalibur's like, "There's no territorial lines for me for my calling." The Elite and the House of Black are up third, Trios Championship. Don Callis is on commentary, and he's stating he is very nervous about this match. And actually did a very good promo with Renee on the pre-show about how you can't prepare for these three. They're so unpredictable, and they're also really great wrestlers beyond their personas. So Omega and Buddy Matthews start, and it's a wrestling contest between the two, and then Malachi Black is tagged in, and before him and Omega even lock up, the crowd is chanting, "This is awesome," and they saw this as a special match, which with a lot of fresh interactions for the Elite, and conversely House of Black in a big showcase spot, and it really does tell you that the House of Black have been not realizing their potential yet when you see. Like, this was as basic of a build as you could get for a trios match, that it was, hey, we're doing this match pretty much.
Yeah. I think a lot of that, though, was like purposely keeping them on the back burner so that you could get to this point, because the pay-per-view is so far away and because you had to do this match on a pay-per-view. You can't just do it on TV. But, presentation-wise, like the House of Black, I think, might be the coolest looking faction certainly in AEW, maybe in all of professional wrestling. And I think as a counter to like sort of the corny like goofiness and awesomeness of the Elite, they are a wonderful counter. I love that big like curtain, like everything about their entrance tonight with Julia Hart, who I think continues to be like such a visually like perfect addition to the group. I thought was awesome, made them just feel so big time.
I thought that they did a great job in this match, particularly on commentary, of elevating Brody King. And first of all, he had an awesome look, but they protected him in this match. Like, it took the three of them to get Brody King into any sort of a vulnerable position in the match. And the commentators did such a great job of getting over his size that I thought that they... Like, sometimes it's let's get everybody over. And it felt like there was a concerted effort, like, let's focus on Brody here. Like, let's make him a central figure of the match. And I thought he gained the most out of this trios match in terms of what he went into and coming out of it.
This was like, like a giant being booked to, dominate a Royal Rumble, except this was a trios match. And I think the sheer fact that you had the Young Bucks both sell the fear of being in the ring with Brody King, and not just that, having to work together as longtime tag team champions, having to pair up together and still not be enough, and needing the god of professional wrestling, Kenny Omega, for the three of them to team up against this one guy. This was like by far the biggest push and biggest spotlight Brody King has had during his time in AEW, and I guess by extension, in terms of eyeballs, maybe his entire career.
Yeah, and they credit like the changing of the tide of the match to when Brody King gets tagged in and House of Black takes over, and Omega can't execute the one-winged angel or Snapdragon because of King's size. So Julia Hart grabs Nick Jackson's leg from the floor on a springboard attempt, and it allows King to lift up Nick with the choke, hanging him off the apron as he did with Darby Allin. And Matt then super kicks his brother free, and a V-trigger sends Brody King to the floor. So that was one of our examples of it, taking all three of them to subdue Brody King. And then we see a pair of Snapdragons onto Malachi Black. Julia Hart is back on the apron, and after Kenny Omega ducks a back heel kick, he goes for the one-winged angel. It's stopped, and he misses Malachi Black and hits a V-trigger to Julia Hart, who got knocked into 2001 in her as an infant here onto the floor. Just nailed onto the floor.
Well, no longer the youngest House of Black member, I think we saw by the end of this match.
Oh, that's true. Nick makes the save. They hit Dante's Inferno onto Kenny Omega. Matt's in to make the save. It's Brody King with a suicide dive onto both Bucks, sending Matt over the barricade. And it's 3-on-1 against Omega until the Bucks return. Pair of super kicks all around, and then a triple super kick onto Brody King, followed by a BTE trigger to Malachi Black. Matthews is now in for the save, and then the Bucks call for the Meltzer driver onto Malachi. But it gets stopped when Nick flips and rotates in midair and gets nailed with a Buddy Matthews knee strike. Black gets to his feet, hits the back heel kick, and they follow with Dante's Inferno on Matt Jackson, and Black gets the pinfall. New Trios champions, the House of Black. An excellent Trios match.
They finished the match with Brody King's move. You know, they had already hit the Black Mass, but like the exclamation point was Brody King's finisher, and that's what I loved the most about this match. First of all, sign me up for a best of 7 between these two teams, okay? This match was awesome. I thought it lived up for, to all the high expectations that I think we would have had for this. But my favorite thing about it was the fact that they decided to collectively focus on making Brody King a star in the body of this match. I think, you have Malachi Black, who is already seen as at a certain star level. I think Buddy Matthews, he has notoriety from the WWE, and I think he's at least well known. But like in a Brody King, you in one match, I thought really kind of turned him into somebody to be feared, a giant that stands out from the other giants in AEW, and the guy that I'm actually most excited about coming out of this match. So when you look at them as a collective, the House of Black were really portrayed as unbeatable as a unit here. Their three-way teamwork, I thought, and their pace lived up to the expectations you would have for a trios match set by, the Elite and the Death Triangle as a complete package. Not only can the three of them wrestle, but they look amazing. So, you have now, like, I think the most worthy people to take over this trios division, allowing the Elite to now be able to go off in their separate ways. And I think at the very least, I hope that they build up to a rematch. Maybe in the meantime, give me Kenny versus Buddy Matthews, which is an interaction they teased but didn't give us a whole lot of. But then you build up to a rematch and add the stip that the Elite can no longer challenge for these belts as long as House of Black has the belts, and firmly establish the House of Black as like these new leaders of this division. I thought this match was great.
Jamie Hayter, Saraya, and Ruby Soho followed that for the Women's Championship. We have Toni Storm and Britt Baker at ringside. They brawl into the crowd. The crowd was into this from the start, and Ruby leaps off the barricade onto them, and as she got onto the barricade, the security guard had to hold her hand for balance. So get ready, Twitter, who are just going to have a field day on that one, I'm sure. Hayter and Saraya then drop Ruby throat first on the barricade, and there's a striking battle with Saraya telling them to stop, so they continue their attack, and then there's a basement Rana by Ruby. Tower of Doom spot gets executed by Saraya, and then she applies the PTO, followed by the Rampage. So, again, we need some rebranding for Paige's moves here, which are right now just the,
Yes.
Baker distracts, nails Saraya, and then hits Destination Unknown to Saraya, but Hayter breaks up the cover. Hayter then goes for the ripcord to Soho, but then it's Saraya that comes off the ropes, and she takes it as well. So Saraya's down in the corner, and there's a roll-up attempt by Hayter. Saraya kicks out, or sorry, it's Soho that kicks out, and then Hayter just adjusts and cradles her and then pins Soho in 10 minutes and 3 seconds, which it just felt like an off. The finish just came off as just ill-timed, I would say. It just seemed as though it did not flow very well for me, but 10 minutes, 3 seconds, Jamie Hayter retains the title. Your thoughts on the match before we get to the angle?
I thought the match in total was a good match. You know, I really like the pace that a three-way provides. It was pretty action-packed and I thought pretty consistently entertaining. And I'm reminded that, like, Saraya is still in the very early stages of her comeback following, you know, several years layoff. And I thought she did pretty well here for this style of match, considering, you know, certainly being one of three was a great way to kind of get her on a pay-per-view while living up to the very fast and physically demanding standard of an AEW pay-per-view match. But I thought, to me, Ruby Soho really stood out here. I think she's been pretty awesome ever since she's come back, you know, from that nose injury. And I thought she carried her intensity and the tightness of her action really well. But the standout continues to be Jamie Hayter, and I think she continues to prove why she should be the leader of this division right now. Her quick pace and the heaviness of her striking immediately stands out among the three. It's a very fan-friendly style, and, you know, probably one of the reasons why she's organically attracted this sort of a babyface reaction. But yeah, this story continues, it seems.
It continues because Storm attacks Baker on the floor and then starts stomping on Hayter. And Soho is just watching this. She's upset after the loss because she took the pinfall. And then Saraya joins in. Baker returns. She gets knocked down, and Soho is staying neutral. And then she finally gets up and she throws Storm and Saraya to the floor and yells, "You don't run this place. This is our home, bitches." And then stands with Jamie Hayter before nailing her with No Future and hits Baker with Destination Unknown. And it's unknown where her allegiance lies. Is she just on her own and she's taking out everyone? But in fact, Toni Storm, who nails this cameraman and smashes it, passes Soho a can of spray paint. And Soho spray paints Hayter and Baker. And she has joined allegiances with Toni Storm and Saraya.
Yes. What's the name? What's the name of the group?
The Riot Squad.
I don't know. Riot Squad. The Soho Squad? No. So what is it? Homegrown, and what's the WWE team?
I don't know. Ruby said just called them bitches. They could go with that.
I don't think that's the name. Chat room, let me know. The Outsiders. Thank you, Nathan. Yeah. Are they actually going by Outsiders? Really?
I hope not.
I guess they don't. So Brian says they don't have actual names, so maybe they'll come up with a stable name at some point. I have not been a fan at all of this entire storyline, but I like this angle, and I think, like, Soho's turn breathes a bit of new life into it. For one thing, I think, you know, Soho needs it. Like, she's done about as much as she could as a babyface. She's challenged unsuccessfully for the title several times. And I think having another legitimate wrestler in the group helps kind of bolster them as a threat. I really hope this is a fresh start for their creative, because the creative has been some of the worst I think we've seen. But I'm willing to give this another chance because adding Soho to the mix means the babyfaces are going to add another name to the mix, and you have a lot of people out there that could use that spot. And I'm looking at maybe a Riho.
I still don't like the direction of, like, the homegrown talent versus, I mean, for lack of a better term, it's like, okay, we're the WWE talent, and it's. Yeah. I just feel like they're playing on this a lot. It's not as though this story has captivated people. If anything, it's watered down Jamie Hayter's reign, which, like, in ring, like, this is the strongest this title has been presented, in my opinion, so far. I mean, she is having consistently great matches. It's a character that has been brought up by the audience that they're really into at this point. I just don't think they're into this story at the beginning, nor are you. Like, what is the motivation of the Outsiders? Like, what, we don't want to be here?
So that is the problem, John. You know, I think all the pieces are there, and I think the talent's there. They've yet to really establish reasons why they are together. And it's weird because, like, Saraya in her first promo in AEW as a babyface, I thought it was a way better heel promo explaining how superior she is, you know, how superior people...
Her Tokyo Dome history.
sure, whatever. Like people with her level of experience are. That's the type of angle they should be. That's the type of promo they should be cutting. We've wrestled in front of stadiums. How many people here have? And that's sort of like play into that a little bit. Maybe not that blatantly, but like you know what I mean.
They're not hitting it super hard, but in a promotion that we have like MJF and Eddie Kingston and FTR, it's like this. It's like this place is we don't want to be here. Like there is a lot of that, and I don't want to see. I'm not saying these three are really hitting that button hard, but it's the collective of it all that I just don't like the idea of. Our identity is we're from the big company.
Yeah, I understand, but this division also needs something. And this, all the pieces happen to be in place right now where you have three people that were former WWE people that you can argue were taking some of the attention away from AEW homegrown talent that were arguably doing perfectly fine on their own. I think there's a good story to be mined there. We just haven't really seen that good creative yet. I also wonder if there's a possibility that they might be building to either a Blood and Guts or a Stadium Stampede now that they're, really kind of filling out these factions with the women.
It's possible. Yeah. It's typically a May event that they go for Blood and Guts. It's certainly possible.
It would be, a big challenge, but I mean, we've seen women have very good War Games matches before, so I certainly don't rule it out. I would love to see Jade Cargill finally enter the mix, and I think she'd be a perfect addition to this homegrown stable. For whatever reason, they've kept her so sequestered from the rest of this division that it almost feels like I'm watching a different show. This will give her relevance and actually give her something beyond just, this win streak that I think has kind of
It's a good idea.
Boring.
She should get injected into this. It would be helpful. Hangman Page against Jon Moxley in the Everybody Bleeds match, our Texas Death Match. And this was incredible. If you are into violent spectacles, I thought this was excellent.
Yeah.
Page jumps him as Moxley is making his entrance, and we get right into it. We're introducing.
By the way, so it's basically a last man standing match. That's what Texas Death is.
Texas Death Match.
Yeah.
Moxley brings out barbed wire immediately, and they're fighting over it. And Page drives the barbed wire into Moxley's forehead, and the dude starts bleeding on screen.
Like how
Jon
many minutes?
Moxley.
Were you counting?
Oh, it was within 5. He was bleeding here. Page then wraps it around his foot. Moxley gets a fork, and he ends up applying a triangle and stabs him with the fork. Abdullah was not ever doing that I can recall.
Yeah, did Haleo invent this one?
This would be,
The fork triangle?
It would only be behind closed doors. Maybe this is what
I saw the Meow Brothers do this once.
Yeah. So Page then he gets his forehead all carved up. Page then misses Moxley and runs into a barbed wire chair in the corner. We also had a barbed wire table set up on the floor. Tons of barbed wire throughout this. Moxley brings out Quentin Jackson's chain and 2 bricks. It's about time we get some bricks involved in these matches.
We've seen cinder blocks. Bricks are sort of an unusual choice, and I think should be. I hope to see more of them after this.
Yeah. Also,
We've
not
seen
enough
Lego bricks, but not real bricks.
Yes, we also have not got enough men's hands squeezed between bricks. So he put Hangman's hand between the 2 bricks. He made a hand sandwich and stepped on the brick and followed it with a pile driver on the chain. Then the barbed wire board is placed onto 2 chairs on the floor, and it's Page with a backdrop suplex and a lariat, finally stopping Moxley's attack. And he dumps Moxley with a fallaway slam onto a barbed wire chair, followed with a deadeye on the chair, with Moxley still getting up from the count. So Page puts him through the barbed wire board on the floor with a pescado, and Moxley yells out, "Oh boy!" And the barbed wire is, this dude doesn't wear a shirt for these, so he's pulling it from his skin. I mean, it was, this was not for the faint of heart, to say the least. All this shit we're describing right now, it paled in comparison to me than these guys giving each other legit nails to the back and just digging their nails in. And dude, especially Mox is like, he's clawing it with these barbed wire cuts on his back. That to me was the hardest part to watch of this whole match. Like, I can take stomps on bricks, barbed wire this, but man, those nails to the back. I mean, it was like, that's like the easiest old school pro wrestling move. And but the key is you don't really do it. And these guys were like, let's fucking claw each other's backs off. Okay, let's do it.
And it's because of the barbed wire, like, wounds that were already there. Absolutely. To me, that's professional wrestling right there. When you can get away and get a big reaction for doing something that hopefully doesn't hurt that much.
Page is on the turnbuckle and he gets knocked off by Moxley, and he does a flip through this barbed wire board on the floor, and he came down at he was like coming down head first towards this as he breaks this board. Like, it looked pretty scary as he's coming down. Then the two make their way back into the ring. They're battling it out. Buckshot lariat gets ducked, and Page is hit with a Death Rider, and that's followed with a stomp onto a brick by Moxley, giving a shout out to his former Shield buddy. Rear naked choke is applied by Moxley, but then he lets go. Page comes back with a lariat, and he stacks the bricks on their side, because a regular brick, it's just not enough. You got to put them upright. And the Deadeye and Death Rider get blocked. Choke is applied by Page, and he wraps the chain around Moxley, and Moxley breaks free with a low blow, and the crowd boos Jon Moxley when he goes to the groin. So Page blasts him with the brick. Moxley gives the middle fingers as the buckshot is hit, and he's got the chain around Moxley's neck, and he proceeds to hang him over the top rope. So the Hangman wins by hanging a man, as Moxley taps in 26 minutes and 3 seconds. A very significant finish for Jon Moxley to tap out. And as much as we talk about all the different baby faces that came out on top, Hangman Page was at the top of it in terms of your contender, I would say. But a lot of interesting options that you have of a very deep babyface side of things.
Yeah. I think this feud has completely reheated Hangman Page back up into title contention. I mean, he's a guy, like, prior to that concussion that he had with Mox, and I don't know if that Mox match was meant to go this far, and I don't know if it was meant to have Hangman Page come out on top at the end of it all. But what happened, and they used it to their advantage, and at the end of it, Hangman Page is as hot as I think he's been in really quite some time. So I would definitely, pair him up with MJF sooner than later. This match was incredible. As bloody and violent and as gruesome as you would expect. I thought it had some really brilliantly, creatively, beautifully executed spots. There was a lot of beauty in this very violent, bloody match. The use of the bricks in particular for the stomp and the hand sandwich, I particularly loved. I loved Page's fall away slam and Deadeye onto the barbed wire chair. Really, like, this is the type of match that you could tell Jon Moxley lives for. Especially impressive is, I think, how good Page has blended with that brutal, violent, bloody, hardcore style that Moxley has kind of introduced. His intensity, I think, has been really, really strong as well. And in terms of story, I felt this match firmly drove Mox into heel territory with Claudio and now with Yuta when he hit that low blow. I mean, the crowd is okay with bricks. The crowd is okay with, all, like, whatever you want to do, barbed wire, nails on the back of a guy. But the moment you hit a low blow behind a ref's back, there's no nobility in that. And this was when the crowd, I felt, turned on Moxley in favor of Page. So I think it sets Mox up pretty well for, a heel run. And this felt like a very satisfying closer. The way that, like, a Briscoe's FTR dog collar match felt like a very satisfying closer. So, yeah, really wonderful series.
Yeah, I felt very similar to watching the dog collar match as I did this. I feel like this is a match of the year contender. I thought it was excellent. For this style of match, I thought it was terrific. Great blow off to the program. You have a really strong babyface in Hangman Page coming out of this. It was just a wonderfully constructed match, delivered on the stipulation in a big way. A lot of creativity that went into this, and both were excellent in it. So a hell of a match that these two had, and 26 minutes no less.
Wow.
Samoa Joe and Wardlow for the TNT Championship is after that. We have Wardlow early on hitting
and let's talk about this. The match order, I think, was heavily debated. a lot of people were campaigning for Bryan and MJF to start the pay-per-view, and at least wondering where Texas Death was going to be, because we knew that was going to be tough to follow. They decided to put 2 matches in between Texas Death and the Ironman match, saving the Ironman match for the last, putting Samoa Joe and Wardlow in arguably the most
it was the toughest spot on the card because nothing was following the Ironman match.
Yeah, by far.
Yeah, it was certainly the one where, like, if the audience dipped, and I would not say they were like down for this match, but they were down from the previous match for sure. Powerhouse Hobbs is shown watching in the arena, and the crowd does start chanting Wardlow. And when I heard those Wardlow chants, I mean, it does really ring true of where this guy was a year ago, and those Wardlow chants that were deafening when this guy was at his peak. And it certainly cooled off from that period. Joe sweeps out the leg, and Wardlow's fighting back, hits a swanton, and then it's the coquina clutch by Joe that Wardlow fights, and he's starting to fade when he gets to the rope, and Joe is signaling for his own symphony, and Wardlow stops the powerbomb, locks on his own version of the coquina clutch, rear naked choke, and he yells at Joe, "Die!" And Joe is in this coquina clutch, and I don't think anyone was ready for this, because the arm goes up once, twice, and on the third time, it goes down. And this is a very rare finish in pro wrestling, that the arm goes down. 10 minutes and 41 seconds. Wardlow is the winner. And then you can see him. He is scouring this arena. Where is Powerhouse Hobbs? And then he sees that sonic ring in the distance and locks eyes with Hobbs, which is the match on Wednesday. So I did not think that this stood out as one of the better matches on the card. It was certainly, I think the audience dipped a bit, and I don't think they were ready for that finish either. That said, when they did the tease in the sudden death with Danielson's arms being brought up, I thought it made this finish even better, that they almost did this to make that drama accentuated in the sudden death, and it worked for me. So I enjoyed this finish more when I saw that spot happen later in the main event.
I think when we were thinking about like a possible buffer match between Texas Death and Iron Man, you and I had both, I think rightfully, assumed that the tag team match would be there because it contains sort of like your comedy characters. I certainly didn't expect Wardlow and Joe to take that spot, and you wonder why. And you see the result, and this could very well be the exact reason why. I mean, this was almost a sacrifice play, in my opinion. Anything you were going to put in this spot after Texas Death was likely not going to receive, the reaction that it would if it was, starting the show, for instance. But I think not only was this there to, give you more buffer time between the two, but it might have been there to establish the believability of the arm raising in a submission. And for that reason, I can understand if that is in case, what they were going for. May be effective. You can argue whether or not, somebody like Wardlow should be kind of put into this position, whether or not somebody like Samoa Joe should be, tapping out like this. But ultimately, I respect the play if that was the intent.
Yeah, it was, I would say, just bell to bell, the actual match itself. I would not say that this one was one that exceeded your expectations going in. And it's a big match on Wednesday for both Wardlow and Hobbs. Like that's a big one for both of them to go out and have a great match. So second from the top before the Ironman match is the tag title match with the Guns, Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal, the Acclaimed, and Orange Cassidy and Danhausen. We have Cassidy and Danhausen in matching black outfits, and Danhausen wearing sunglasses on his way to the ring. Max does his rap about giving golden showers. The Guns are the weakest champs that dress like single moms, and Jeff Jarrett forgot his Cialis.
As they threw Cialis at him. Yeah,
great. Jarrett does the strut at the beginning, gets a lot of heat for that, and then the Acclaimed do the Scissor Me Timbers onto Dutt. Big chance of ass boys throughout the match. We got a 4-way strut with the Guns, Jarrett, and Lethal for a mini alliance that they had until the Guns ended up breaking the alliance. And then Satnam Singh enters the ring, tosses the Guns over the top. So Danhausen stands up to Satnam, saying the crowd is into this. Dutt intervenes, and Danhausen snaps his pencil before he gets dropped. There's an orange punch and a low blow to Satnam Singh before Billy hits the famouser on Satnam, and then the Guns hit a low blow to their own father. We see an arrival on Austin, followed by the mic drop, but Colton tackles Bowens to break the pin. Jarrett gets the guitar, and Max Caster ducks it, gets the guitar, but gets warned by Aubrey Edwards. So I guess there are DQs in this four-way?
I guess it's a good question. Like, I don't think you'll get DQ'd, but they can, it's frowned upon. And if the referee has any power, they'll take away the weapon. That's kind of what I took from it.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, she took it away, and that led to, you won't believe it, an AEW referee's back turned and missed the Golden Globe shot, followed by the stroke onto Max Caster for a big near fall. Jarrett then yells at Aubrey, shoves her, so she shoves him back, and it leads to a blind tag to Austin Gunn, who is in with Danhausen. Danhausen hits a German, misses with the pump kick, and the Guns hit 310 to Yuma and retain the titles in 13-21, Danhausen taking the pin.
Again, you have to look at a match like this in the context of this entire show. And as not just a buffer match, but a match to kind of create some levity on the show, I thought it was a pretty entertaining and successful match for that reason. The crowd was really reactive throughout this entire thing, and I think that's especially commendable given this was 3 hours into the show at this point. It tells you how strong the personalities attached to this are. I continue to find, like, these, especially with the Guns, defending, these are title matches that are a step down from what AEW has kind of like established for itself. This is not the Bucks versus the Lucha Brothers. This felt to me almost more like a TV match than something that's worthy on a pay-per-view. But you can argue maybe for a buffer match, you want something that feels more like a TV match than something that's completely emotional and exhaustive like Bucks versus Lucha Brothers. So it depends how you look at it, but I would classify this as effective and successful.
It kept the audience. It was like you had enough of the different characters. Like, it wasn't like a blowaway match, but it served its purpose, I thought, on the show. And again, this was more so leading to an angle afterwards as Renee enters the ring, so you know something's up. And the crowd is booing the Guns. They list off all the teams they've beaten and call themselves the best team in the world when FTR arrive, and they end up hitting a spike pile driver to Colton and then a shatter machine, which is what it was called here on the broadcast by Excalibur. And in all of this, Dax
I'm guessing he just forgot that they call it the Big Rig. But,
probably. Yeah. But in all of this, Dax Harwood gets hit hard way, and dude was like bleeding from the whole side of his head here.
Yeah, so add that to the tally of people that bled on the show.
A lot of blood on this show. Mm-hmm. And they grabbed the tag titles at the end, so clearly going towards a Guns FTR match.
So we'll find out at the end of this feud if they're sticking around.
Yes. MJF, Bryan Danielson, Ironman match is our main event, and we have Danielson come out, and MJF, before he enters, we get a choir of devil worshippers out here as they're playing violins, cellos, and I thought this was like a really relaxing tune that they were playing before MJF's like obnoxious music just goes over the speakers.
They were playing MJF's theme.
Yeah, I thought it was really nice. It was like the acoustic version.
Sure, yeah.
MJF then comes out in a white devil mask, and
the same one he had for
the Punk deal at the end of All Out.
No, when he won the chip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So MJF drops his belt as he's being introduced in the ring, and the crowd just jumps on him over it. And they note as well that Bryce Remsburg has been training for this match, which they gave this guy a workout for some of these sequences.
He looks to be in pretty good shape almost all the time. He's like one of the more active referees.
Well, he was he was up for these 60 minutes, man, and he was all over the place. So early on, the two are matching one another, ending with dueling kip-ups. So the crowd's getting to their feet, and MJF offers his hand, and Danielson kicks it away. And we see MJF hop the barricade, dump some trash onto fans, and then takes a kid's drink, and he pours this drink onto this child. And this was a very debated spot.
He took the mother's drink. It looked to be clear, so I would assume water, and he dumped it on the child. And what sort of debate was registered here as a result of that?
Well, Tony Khan was saying they had a real discussion about this backstage. I guess insinuating that this was not a planned spot or something with a kid.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I even buy that. Like this felt like a really obvious plant, but
You would think so.
yeah, I don't know. Okay.
But MJF looks into the camera and says, "Oh no, is this going to cost me a star, Dave? Maybe I won't win the Bryan Danielson award."
We probably won't.
Probably not.
Yeah, that's probably going to Bryan Danielson again next year, but I anticipate this to get plenty of stars.
MJF is in control, and he's working over the injured shoulder of Danielson. And then Danielson responds with a suicide dive, but in doing so, runs into the barricade. And MJF continues the attack. And the clock is showing up on the screen intermittently, but they've also got the... They had the scores on the screen. I don't know if they had the clock up on the screen the whole
Intermittently.
time. Yeah.
No, not the whole time.
But for those in the arena, yeah, I think it was kind of in and out as well. Danielson hits a sunset bomb, and then we have Danielson skin the cat, but gets drop kicked to the floor, and MJF does his Shawn Michaels Heartbreak Kid pose right in the center of the ring for everybody. And with that, he felt like he was Shawn Michaels as he went for an Asai moonsault and jams his knee upon landing, and this became Danielson's target for the whole rest of the match. And I thought MJF did a phenomenal job selling this knee. Even like you and I will be critical when someone's selling the knee and then they do something stupid that goes against it. Like MJF would do things like the tombstone, but he played it up so big. Like, I hit this tombstone, but now my knee is totally screwed from doing this. And he just sold it throughout the whole rest of the way.
The psychology was fitting for the entire match. Yeah. This was also a knee injury that he had initially tried to sell after the Takeshita match, after he did the powerbomb onto the knee and sold it and taped it up for the remainder of that show. So I didn't think that he would bring it up, but evidently that was maybe always the plan with that setup. But by the way, people are saying like there are people reporting it from in attendance that the mom was pissed and had to be talked down. So yeah, I guess sure, very legit, possibly that spot.
It was brought up at the press conference, but we're not watching the press conference, so I can't really speak to what was said. Danielson comes off the top, and MJF catches him in the salt of the earth, but Danielson rolls through, and MJF captures him into a pump handle driver. And dude, Taz's reaction to this, like, he apparently like jumped, as Excalibur notes, because of the angle he came down on his neck as a guy that's also broken his neck.
A very, very dangerous move. It's one that I believe he used to use like on the indies, this half Nelson pump handle driver. Very scary, especially when it's a guy like Bryan, but they executed it. Yeah.
And then they are doing these rolling inside cradles all over the ring, these nonstop reversals of sunsets, and then the rolling covers continue. Awesome sequence. And then a double clothesline puts both men down. The crowd is applauding this. And with that, Danielson rises to his feet and lands the Busaiku knee to get the first fall of the match at 25 and a half minutes. What did you think of this match by the first fall?
Well, first of all, I want to talk about like the match order and the fact that we were about to watch an Ironman match. What, like three plus hours in? When did this start? Like 11?
Around 10:45.
10:45. Okay, so if you're counting like when we first saw that buy-in match, I mean, it was like an hour and a half into this. 3.5 hours into the show. Mm-hmm. By the time this match began, I was not tired. I was not dreading it. Like, and I think it tells you how great the rest of this show was. The fact that it was not a bloated feeling show by the time we got to this point. And I think for me, it was the grandiose stature of an Iron Man match that was enough for me to like be excited and energetic for it. I thought it was really strong. I thought the character work was strong. I thought the body part work was strong. And I thought establishing MJF as, at least at the early stage, a technical equal to Bryan Danielson before he had to resort to, cheating, of course, and underhanded moves, I thought was very entertaining. 35 minutes, I think, is a very understandable and justifiable point where somebody would eat a pinfall.
So Danielson is up 1-0, and MJF collapses before he can take a follow-up Busaiku knee. And an element of this match is that there were no rest periods. So psychologically, you have to work that into the match too, that if you have the guy beat, there's nothing preventing you from continuing to go for a cover or keep a submission or go back to a submission. So you had to work that in too. Like, it made no sense to just go to your neutral corner or something like that. So MJF then lands a low blow, and for this is disqualified. But with the low blow, he gets 2 successive falls on Danielson. So all of a sudden, it is 2-2 between them.
I kind of feel like this whole portion could have maybe been better communicated with the help of like a ring announcer or something. Like the way they did this match, they didn't really have the ring announcer do any live updates. They just simply popped the number, on the screen. And those of us at home, like, obviously have the benefit of a commentator. But I imagine, like, if you're watching live, all of a sudden there's in the span of like 30 seconds a DQ and then 2 pinfalls, and all of a sudden the score goes from 0-1 to 2-2. It might be, it might have been the flow of it might have been improved a little bit more with some sort of like other signifier, but I'm sure by the end everybody understood.
Well, yeah, the low blow was right in front of Bryce, so maybe people connected the dots on that. But as well, like, we see a lot of times.
We see a lot of low blows.
AEW referees are just watching stuff.
Something just to kind of officially recognize that this was a decision,
This is also around the time that Bryan Danielson joins the All Blood Club, and he starts leaking. And they fight on the edge of the apron. Again, it's Danielson going for the knee, MJF going after the shoulder, and MJF places Danielson onto the timekeeper's table. MJF climbs to the top, and he goes through with this incredible elbow drop, huge spot in the match, and he's clutching his knee and then demands that Bryce get into the ring instead of check on Danielson because he wants to win by a count out, and Danielson gets in at the count of 9. But this elbow drop was spectacular looking.
I thought it almost looked like a bit sloppy, and when
Really?
like in the way that his legs were kind of like splailing, towards the end. But I thought it worked for the character. Like, he's supposed to be a character that rarely dives off the top rope, and so it almost felt like he was going to a direction that he was desperate to go to because he's not normally comfortable doing this. But this is also a guy that used to do like Swanton Bomb, so like obviously, like, I wouldn't put past him if this was all the work too.
Well, and when he's climbing up, like, it looked like he almost like lost his footing on the top before he like regained his balance, and then
remember we're like 40 something minutes.
Oh yeah, it's the time is going by quick. Like there was no drag for me in this match at all. Like, they kept the intensity up pretty significantly, and again, they had a great crowd to do this in front of. MJF then takes Danielson and hits a tombstone onto the remnants of the broken table, again hurting his knee in the process. He's in agony, screaming, and then hits a heat seeker, pinning Danielson at 40 minutes or so. So he now goes up 3-2, but they explain his knee is too hurt and he can't capitalize to go for a follow-up cover, which I thought was a great little attention to detail. Also throughout this, MJF is constantly going for water. And this would all play itself out at the end, but it's like this idea that he is struggling to keep up with Danielson and has got to like hydrate himself.
So this to me sells the sort of attraction of an Ironman match. You're getting to see a performer get into territory that you've never seen him get into before. And I thought MJF sold this really well through the constant water breaks and later on the oxygen breaks as well. You need to convey to the audience that you're barely surviving, towards these final 15 minutes. And I thought it was very effective what he did.
Then with Danielson selling, he gets his hands stomped, and now MJF is looking to the camera with Danielson. Say hi to Birdie and Buddy. I told you this would happen to Dada. And both Bellas were at the show as well.
Oh, okay.
Danielson then reverses, and he ends up posting MJF on the floor, hits a flying knee, and then Danielson climbs to the top, and he just like free falls on top of MJF, which Taz says there's no Lucha name for that. I mean, he just like jumped off and was like his body weight was going to land on his target.
I mean, technically, I think it was a plancha, but sure.
Sure. This was like a dude just jumping into the pool without any concern. There's a spider suplex by Danielson and then lands a diving headbutt, which ends up opening up MJF. And when I say opened him up, I mean this man lost about 10% of his body weight with this blood loss. This was his tribute to Muto.
Yeah, it's the type of blood that I think if I showed a still of it, I think this video would get flagged and maybe possibly demonetized. Like he might have cut an artery here. He must have taken blood thinners and just about everything because like the moment he cut, like this dude outbled John Moxley on this show, and
This was the most blood of anyone on the show. It went
yeah,
from JF.
yeah.
He lands a Busaiku knee and then applies the Regal stretch, and MJF has to tap out. I was glad that they incorporated the Regal stretch here for the story and that MJF had to tap out to it. So with 10 minutes to go, it is tied at 3, and he goes to reapply the move when MJF grabs the arm for the Salt of the Earth. Danielson rolls out. Now he gets the label lock, but MJF is able to scramble out of it back to the Salt of the Earth, and he figure fours the arm, hyperextends the other arm, and grabs the leg as he morphs into Max Sabre Jr.
Very nice. Yes, that maybe he really is going after the Bryan Danielson award.
I think so. I think he outlined his target earlier in the match. Then he hits a heat seeker, only gets a 2 count, and we've got 4 minutes to go. He takes another thing of water, which leads to the crowd chanting H2O, which I'm glad they got over this chant. As we're in the last 4 minutes, I don't think we need our comedy chant of the night, but this was brief. MJF stops him on the turnbuckle, hits a tombstone, the knee is too hurt, and they do a close-up, and they had done a headbutt exchange, and they're, of course, delivering strikes and stuff, so I don't know what it was that hit him, but he's got this welt on his forehead that is going to look awful tomorrow.
Brian or MJF? I missed
MJF. Like, it was just this knot on his forehead that they had zoomed in on. And then Danielson catches him with the single leg crab with a minute left, and this crowd goes nuts. They have peaked this perfectly. They are so loud. He pulls MJF to the center, and MJF is about to tap, but then he stops himself. Awesome reaction here. And then Danielson hooks the other arm in the final seconds. The bell rings, and then MJF taps, but the match is over, and it is a 3-3 tie after 60 minutes. They have to get an oxygen tank for MJF, taking us back to a Double or Nothing last year with Wardlow. Remember when they had to take him out on the gurney?
And there was an oxygen tank?
They put the oxygen mask. Remember it was like on his they right. Screwed it up on him and they were taking him out on the like
gurney. His head his forehead was getting
Yeah,
oxygen.
It was on his forehead. They were much they were much better trained this time around a year later. And the crowd is chanting bullshit because they're thinking that MJF retains the title based on them hitting the time limit. But the 60-minute portion, your thoughts on how it culminated?
Fucking remarkable. Absolutely. You know, and like, to me, like, again, the Ironman match, on the surface, it feels like maybe a really long movie for you, John. Like, you might not necessarily be looking forward to watching a 3-hour movie in a theater. But I think, you know, almost in every situation, by the time we get to the final 10 minutes, you might be on your feet, you might be watching, you might be like, you know, screaming your head off. And that's exactly what I think this crowd did. Like, by the moment they got to the final 10 minutes, especially with the great job they did telling that story of MJF's exhaustion, along with both of their body parts basically falling off, I thought they built to such an incredible crescendo, especially, you know, for those final seconds with the single leg crap. I love the oxygen mask, you know, like, again, you have a guy bleed this much. It's incredibly legitimate that they would be barely like surviving on a lack of oxygen right here. So I thought it completely made a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and Tony Schiavone gets the instructions in his earpiece, and he goes to the ring and says that Tony Khan is not going to let this end in a draw, so we're going to sudden death rules. And the whole crowd is chanting yes. MJF then shoves Bryce, and Danielson gets a roll-up for a 2 count. Max hits the low blow, so they're teasing that, man, they're going to end this off like a low blow. And then MJF grabs the belt, but he's warned by Bryce, you use that belt, then you're going to lose the belt. So go right ahead. And he hands over the title, and with Bryce going to remove the title from the ring, MJF pulls out the ring, but Danielson ducks and hits a Poison Rana. 62 minutes in, he's going for a Poison Rana, hits the Busaiku knee, and this was the best near fall of any match on this show. This crowd, they bit on this Busaiku knee, and Schiavone screamed. It was the most animated I've heard Tony Schiavone in decades. This, I think it everyone bit on this. It was a tremendous, tremendous near fall.
Yeah, it's everything here in the sudden death I thought was very, very believable. Every false finish.
He goes back to the half crab on MJF, and this is when Bryce sees the ring, and he takes the ring off of his finger, and MJF is fighting the hold. He slaps the mat, but he's not tapping out, reaches the rope, and then he taps, and Danielson releases the hold because he thinks MJF has tapped out, not realizing he's at the rope, and Bryce is informing him that the match is continuing. So Max has slithered to the floor, and he's got the goddamn oxygen tank. And Bryan peers over the edge of the apron, and MJF cracks him with the oxygen tank in the head. And with that, applies the label lock onto Danielson. And Bryce takes the arm, and he lifts it once, and this is when I'm like, the Samoa Joe finish was amazing. He lifts it up twice, and then Danielson on 3 keeps his arm up, but MJF will not release the hold, and therefore Danielson finally has to tap at 5:16 of the sudden death period. MJF retains the championship, and that's how the show ends, with MJF as your AEW champion. Excellent match.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what can you say? We saw 2 men go out there and have a 65-minute masterpiece. They set out with that intention, and they completely delivered. Both, I think, an incredible physical feat, a very legitimate physical feat, and also an incredible epic story that they crafted by the end of it. To me, this is up there with Ospreay and Omega as my two leading match of the year candidates. One of the best matches I've seen from both men. I'm maybe pretty safe to say my favorite MJF match. I only hesitate with Bryan because his catalog is so vast, but it's certainly up there. One of, if not the best Ironman match I feel like I've ever seen at 60 minutes length. They went 65 minutes following 3 hours, 4 hours, right, of professional wrestling, something like that, 3 to 4 hours.
I mean, the first match was around 7:15ish, yeah.
And one of those matches was a Texas death match, and not for 1 second of this entire 65 minutes was I ever not engaged. I think the spacing out between this and the Texas death match ultimately became very effective because as soon as Bryan bled, as soon as MJF bled, I was not even thinking about the Texas death match. Like, I thought their blade drops were completely, and I was not necessarily even comparing them. Although, you might have even seen more blood here. Every action, every spot of this match had some purpose. I thought they chaptered it really well using the respective body parts, injuries. I thought the blood was incredibly effectively used, particularly by MJF to sell the exhaustion reached by the end of this, 60-minute time limit. And this is also like maybe part of the reason why I wanted to sell why I was hoping that they would sell the Iron Man aspect a little bit more in the storytelling, because I knew by the time they got to this point, this would be the story. Who can survive? But when you get to 50 minutes, 60 minutes plus. But great drama achieved, especially in the sudden death. Really strong and almost a perfect 60-minute Iron Man match.
Yeah, I think you got 2 very legitimate match of the year contenders on this show between the Texas Death Match and the main event, and I enjoyed both like tremendously. To have 2 matches like that on a show is incredible. Say nothing of the Trios match. That was the Trios Championship match that was on earlier. I thought this was a spectacular show. Like, I would really have to look at some of the best AEW shows, but I would certainly put this one in the conversation. I really, really enjoyed this show. I just thought it was like an excellent professional wrestling pay-per-view, and would certainly be we can debate match of the year at this point. Show of the year, I think this is my early candidate for show of the year.
Yeah, I again, and I think much of that is because you can look at this show and you can look at the percentage of what great matches there were to just the number of matches. The fact that there are only 9 matches and almost all of them were strong is a major part of the reason why I think we're looking so fondly on this. I also want to say, because the result is good, to me does not excuse the build. This was a very heavily criticized build, and I don't want people to come out after and say, see, I told you guys this was going to be great. You were so negative about the build. The show is the show, but how interested you get people into buying the show is almost a different story. Like,
that's what you're selling. You're selling the anticipation. Like, that is like the end result is the, for those that you convince to buy the show.
Exactly. The end, like the show itself, I think is a great way to entice people to get your next show. But if you didn't entice people to get the show in the first place, then it's almost a different conversation. So ultimately, we'll see what the numbers are. If we do get those numbers, we have some from the press conference. I take it, but
Early estimate. Yeah.
Strictly looking at the bell to bell action on this, yes, it was remarkable. I have to say, looking at the quality, absolutely.
And this is, this is the first show. Well, it's the second show with MJF, very much in this main event role. Like he had the Punk match a year ago, but then, challenging for the title, now defending the title. Like this is one that it is very much of like the MJF Danielson program. Like this is not a show where, like I think the lion's share is on MJF and Danielson. Like the Texas Death Match was promoted well as your number 2 match, but this was one where we had a definitive main event that was the headline attraction for the show.
Yeah, and ultimately a good decision to put it at the end because they more than survived, the billing.
All right. At this point, we will open it up to anyone that wants to call in. You can join in. The StreamYard link was sent out earlier today. We will also be getting to your feedback at forum.postwrestling.com. And of course, super chats are welcome too if you are in the live chat and want to chime in with any of your thoughts. We'll do our best to get to as much of the feedback as possible because there's quite a bit.
Let's first jump into a super chat here from John Taylor, who sends $10. Thank you so much for the support, John Taylor. He says, I almost didn't buy this pay-per-view because I was underwhelmed at the build, but it ended up being one of my all-time favorite AEW pay-per-views. So I think that is a wonderful sort of like result for AEW to hear that type of feedback, because it tells you even when they might falter on the weekly TV, they have still built enough trust among their audience to for them to recognize that they will constantly deliver quality when they ask you to pay $40 a month, or sorry, 4 times a year. So yeah, excellent. Shall we go to our first call?
Yes.
Let's go first to Jason. I'm going to go to you, so please unmute yourself. Jason was actually live in attendance at the show tonight.
Hey guys, first time I've actually called in and flew in from Vancouver for the show. Had the very weird experience at the last time I was at a pay-per-view, Chris Jericho closing it at WrestleMania 18 and then opening it here. So that was quite the experience.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, really great show. I'll be honest, flying in, I was feeling a little bit underwhelmed by the build, but they definitely delivered. I would say probably the biggest pop was for the House of Black winning the Trios titles. I thought the main event was great, but you could definitely feel people a little bit kind of burnt out by the end, but a great match nonetheless. I would say the only match that felt like it kind of underwhelmed was the 4-way tag match, but otherwise, I would say from a live experience, a great time to see my first AEW pay-per-view, and definitely one that I'm going to remember for a long time.
How I know you talked about kind of like towards the end of the Ironman match, but overall, did you sense like the crowd was with it throughout? Because it sounded pretty lively throughout. Like it didn't seem like the audience was, sitting on their hands at any point. But what did you sense from the live crowd throughout the 65-minute experiment? Oh, maybe we lost Jason.
Jason?
Okay. He had a flight to catch, maybe. Anyway.
Have a safe trip back to Vancouver, but thank you so much for calling in, and hope you had a great time. Also from the West Coast, actually, we go to BC and Bruce Lord. What's going on, Bruce?
Yeah, firmly on the West Coast. Did not travel out to see this show, although my God, after seeing it, kind of feeling envious of Jason and everybody who did. Like, to quote Moxley, oh boy, this was one hell of a show. John, you were talking a minute ago about how does this stack up in comparison to other AEW shows, and I did kind of go back and kind of look at the cards for things like All Out 2021, Forbidden Door and everything. And I kind of have to feel like this, if you wanted to tell me that any of those kind of 3 major matches, were arguably your match of the year, I wouldn't argue with you at all. And any card that has 3 matches of that quality, but also I think just really satisfying conclusions to some very long-standing feuds, can't really be viewed as anything but a home run. I thought that in particular, the pacing and kind of match structure of this show went really, really well. My friends and I were sort of talking, kind of going into the show about how, okay, you've got like a very stip-heavy blow-off to a long-standing feud in Jungle Boy versus Christian, and then something pretty similar in Page versus Moxley. But the fact that those were kept apart from each other, and I thought had like really different kind of feels and moods and flavors from one another, made sure that none of the really major matches kind of got lost in the wash. And coming out of this card, I feel like you've got a really clear closing of the book on a number of very long-standing AEW stories, and then also a whole bunch of really exciting opportunities and possibilities coming forward. You've got an elevated Page, you've got a very heel-leaning BCC, and I think, not to kind of put too fine a point on it, but like coming out of that Ironman performance, you now have a very credible, like in-ring fighting heel champion in MJF, who will not be taken as lightly or will not be sort of treated in storyline, I think, the way he was heading into this match. It's one of those cases where, like, I kind of feel like the kayfabe storyline of, MJF feeling like he needed to measure up to Danielson kind of matched up with the broader meta fan commentary. And yeah, it just can't be viewed as anything but a massive, massive success at that level.
And you've also introduced, you have seen where the BCC is leaning towards, and Danielson has sort of been on his island. But given the finish of it, it's almost like you have opened the door now of Danielson, having this loss by this nefarious means that you can give more of an edge to Danielson if you want to keep him linked with BCC, and he now has that motivation if you want. And all of a sudden, you've got some incredible options as heels.
Yeah, definitely. And we know that that's kind of, thinking about, I think I kind of like fired a question at you guys a week or two ago, sort of saying, oh, okay, if Starks does kind of, win the blow off with Jericho, where does he go? Who is a heel that he could possibly be paired up with? And I would absolutely love to see Starks mix it up with either Mox or Danielson coming out of that. So yeah, like this kind of really feels like a throwback to, I don't even know when it would be, but just a very particular time that almost kind of, predates your monthly pay-per-views or your kind of like special, mega TV shows or something like that, where everything feels like it had been building up for so long. Like, I know that, technically, Revolution is one of the smaller of the four, AEW pay-per-views, but this really felt like a nice kind of like major closing of a whole bunch of really key stories and chapters. And there's all sorts of places to go. And I think, whether it is, where MJF goes, or again, the Hobbs and Starks match coming out of this, that's great. I think everybody is really, really excited to see a reinvigorated House of Black now just tearing it up with anybody and everybody who would come into this. So yeah, I mean, a couple, we've already seen a couple of super chats and people commenting about the fact that, okay, yeah, maybe not the best build, but again, as a couple of people have said, I kind of feel like that's almost kind of become something that almost AEW pushes back against, is the sense that, okay, maybe the build hasn't been the best. Maybe a couple of the storylines haven't been as clear and direct as they can be, and everybody just has an extra fire under them to really, really deliver. And I just think everybody really did tonight.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate the call, as always.
Just a few notes here from the press conference that I've seen Brandon Thurston send out. So the gate was over $800,000, doing over 8,000 paid, and noting that for the pay-per-view buys, he was asked about it and said it looked to be in line with some of our recent shows, probably up from Full Gear, and possibly in line with what we've been doing for Full Gear, Forbidden Door, and some of these shows that's in the range of 130 to 140,000 buys. And he also got specific that Honor Club, they're at about 12,000 subscribers thus far, and he seems to be very happy with that figure this early since, well, the show launched on Thursday.
Excellent. All right, let's go up next to Brian. Brian, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hi, guys. Yeah, it's going great, especially after that show. I thought it was outstanding. And, really good pace of the pay-per-view overall, and specifically in the main event, which I thought was excellent all around and extremely successful. Danielson is Danielson, but, I'm very happy for MJF for everything he accomplished here. And lots of instances throughout the show of homegrown stars getting wins over WWE alumni. So really make a statement there, save for House of Black beating the Elite. And
but even that match was Brody King, who's not a WWE guy.
That's true. Yeah, he's the only. Yeah, he and Julia Hart are the only outliers aside from.
The point
former
is
SmackDown.
you're making new stars, you know, and the
Yeah,
Elite and the Bucks are already there, but Brody King had a big one tonight.
that's true. Very true. And yeah, I was skeptical of the final burial going in. That exceeded my expectations vastly. And Texas Death Match I thought was great. Not a death match guy, but with wrestlers the caliber of Moxley and Hangman, I thought it was really well done. And yeah, I'm really happy for the House of Black winning. And I think they're the coolest act that they have that they haven't done enough with until now. And I just want them to become the final bosses, the three-headed Goro of this fledgling trios division. But two questions going just to close out my call. After their respective losses, do you see Omega and the Young Bucks going their separate ways in the near future, not severing their friendship, but just pursuing their separate goals now that they're not champions? And does Moxley finally get his fishing vacation after this loss?
Oh yeah, the elusive fishing vacation. Is it fishing season in Cincinnati around now?
I would not know. I'm in New Jersey.
Didn't he already go like ice fishing or something, or that's what he wanted to do? I'm sure he would have hopefully found time. If he hasn't done it yet, he won't do it.
In all honesty, to sell the effects of a match like that, he should probably be off for at least a couple of weeks. I would think, but we will see.
He'll be bleeding on Dynamite.
He'll be
this
bleeding
Wednesday.
on Wednesday in Sacramento,
and then again on Rampage.
Yeah. To the Omega Bucks question, I would like to see the Bucks get a bit more involved in the tag division. I think they need that. Omega is another individual that you can go the babyface or heel direction with. You could also have him semi-involved with Takeshita and this Don Callis story. And ultimately, like, Omega is one of your title contenders. So again, it's sort of like a lot of options that you have at this point of where you go in terms of your main event direction, because if you're looking ahead to Double or Nothing, Hangman Page is an option. Kenny Omega's an option. I would say those are two big ones that you have at your disposal, and it's just finding roles for all these different guys. But I could see a break from the three of them as a trios unit, and then it's finding opponents as well for House of Black, whether it's Death Triangle coming back or some of your other makeshift trios that you have.
Yeah,
right
I think
Thanks a lot,
definitely
guys.
by Double or Nothing you get a singles Kenny match, and I think you get the Bucks in the tag team action.
Yeah. Omega and Black really stood out well in that trios match, but all six guys look great in that.
You could certainly do a few matches coming off on TV of like some of the participants involved. Like if you don't want to just completely end this stuff with the House of Black and Elite, there are pairings that you could certainly play out on TV. Like an Omega Malachi Black match would be great to do on TV one week.
Thanks, Brian, for the call. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Let's go up next to Hansi. Hansi, welcome to the show. Please unmute yourself, Hansi.
What's quick? Can you hear me?
Hey, now we can. Yep. Hey.
I was gonna say that. Yeah, no, it was probably one of my favorite pay-per-views. I mean, but I think like just the quality when I watched it. That obviously was one of the better performed shows and paced out well. I liked how they did the pre-show. I think they should do that more often. I don't think you need like 5 matches on the pre-show just to get it out there. If there's quality, that's cool. But I remember you give a good showcase for the varsity athletes and all that. My favorite matches were probably Christian and Jungle Boy, the Moxley Hangman Page, and the Bryan and MJF one. Listen, I'm with you that the build wasn't like the super greatest. I think the one saving grace for me was that like when MJF makes you go through different opponents, like he did it with Jericho, and it was already like we already saw battles between them, and it was just like we were waiting for it to be over. I think the one saving grace from the booking that maybe wasn't perfect was that Bryan and MJF didn't fight yet. You know what I mean? And I thought like the match was already fresh enough where like they still had me with some of the creative. I didn't like every single thing, every single week that they were doing it. I thought I agree with you that they should have focused more on the endurance factor about it, so they played in there. But I thought phenomenal match, and this is like, if you're going to give me payoffs like this for matches with MJF, then I don't like it solidifies my fucking stance. Oh, sorry. It solidifies my stance that MJF doesn't have to defend it every single week or every single month or so. You know what I mean? Like if you give me a hot enough program, I'm willing to wait and pay for a pay-per-view where he is defending it. You know what I mean? I would like it to defend for big shows. Maybe you build up a battle of the belts for one match with him in it. You know what I mean? But on the press conference, he was naming possible opponents, and he named some of the guys that you guys are talking about, like Hangman, Jungle Boy. It seems to me personally, I'll get your thoughts. I think Adam Cole would probably be this would be Adam Cole's first solid way to go at a prick heel in a babyface way, so he can justify why he has to be the prick to this guy. And I think Adam Cole would be a good fodder for MJF. And I'll leave you guys with that. And good review and good show this past week. Thank you.
Thank you, Hansi. Seems like they're already building to that with like Britt Baker, basically kind of cutting down MJF pretty well online and also tonight with her interview with Renee. So I think we might that feels like a perfect direction for Adam Cole.
That's one. And again, like there was a lot of guys that were not on this show. So it's it does just once again reinforce that depth and sort of that balance of I think a lot of people enjoyed the format tonight. At the other end, we're constantly bringing up, well, where's this person and where's this person? And there's the balance that you want to have as well. Like here was a night where no Adam Cole on the show, Jade Cargill, Eddie Kingston, Claudio, Darby, Sting. It's like these are the people that like they couldn't find spots for on a pay-per-view. Like imagine that, like the depth that you're talking about here.
If you don't have time to tell a story with them, then I don't have the interest to watch a match with them for no reason on a pay-per-view.
But then you get a lot of complaints from fans about why
you'll
you're
get
not
people complaining no matter what.
Yeah, that's a reality of what they deal with, and I think like there's the two sides of it for sure.
I think tonight showed that this was a superior at least lineup. I mean, if they could figure out ways to maybe extend the card to the duration that they happen to like, I would have been happy if this show ended at 11 o'clock. It ended at pretty much like closer to 12. But I don't think any of us would complain if it was quality, like a quality 8 matches, 9 matches, ending at 11 o'clock.
I love the format tonight. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. One other thing we should note, they did confirm Double or Nothing for T-Mobile Arena on May 28th, and they're going to do the MGM Grand for a live Dynamite and live Rampage on the Wednesday and Friday that week. So 3 shows in Vegas, 2 at MGM, and 1 at T-Mobile Arena on May 28th. Which is the day after the WWE King and Queen of the Ring show, which is now happening in Saudi Arabia.
Right. Okay, cool. Let's go to your written feedback for our postwrestlingcafe.com patrons at forum.postwrestling.com. Would you like me to start, John?
Sure.
Saeed from Vancouver says, fun pay-per-view with great to amazing wrestling. The crowd was here for all of it. Just a slight dip in the Joe versus Wardlow match. Match of the night was the trios. That knee Buddy gave looked brutal near the end. Julia Hart took a V-trigger that some in the past took at V-trigger than some in the past. Impressive, okay? Didn't think I'd ever have to change the channel during a pay-per-view, but I did. I could do some violence, but when the fork came out, I had to change.
The fork was too much.
He says,
you could look away. You don't have to change the channel. You could just like look the other way.
He says, good on Will Washington for getting that kid merch and AEW to help smooth things over by having Amanda Huber sit with him. Guess MJF will be talked to not to throw drinks at kids.
Well, there you go. Then that sounds like obviously a situation that MJF is playing his heel role and called the audible to dump a drink on a kid.
Enjoyed the Ironman match. Match was planned very well. Loved the near falls and got the crowd on what used to be cliche finishes.
Cody from Maine, in my feedback for the most recent Dynamite review, I mentioned that this pay-per-view had the lowest interest level for me since the no-crowd pandemic days. That said, I certainly made the right call in ordering the event. This was easily one of AEW's best events ever. The matches delivered on all fronts, even the tag title match that I was flat out wrong about. It served as the perfect fun buffer match before the main event. Very intrigued to see if FTR is sticking around or if this program with the guns will be their last in AEW. Crowd stayed hot, and perhaps more importantly, they got it 100% right when it came to the winners, especially in the case of Hangman Page. Being the first to make Moxley tap out in AEW is huge.
Yeah. Is that right? Like the first time? Yeah.
I mean, geez, the losses you can probably count on one hand, and certainly tapping out, that's the first. So it's not just a win, but it's like a signature win that Hangman has above anyone else in AEW over Moxley.
Pete in Texas says, is it now sink or swim time for talent like MJF, Starks, Wardlow, Hobbs, Hayter, Baker, Guns, Acclaimed? Can they all get a push at once? How often should older talent get over without stunting their growth? Thanks, Pete in Texas.
I don't think MJF is in a sink or swim position on the show.
I mean, tonight was like him being the lead of a pay-per-view, you know, in a championship match. Like, he is in a position where he has to deliver, like, arguably. But when we're talking about whether or not he's like at the top of the card, I mean, he is justifiably at the top of the card. But it's still a lot of demands on for somebody like him.
Yeah, I think he's doing really great in the role. I would say for Ricky Starks, I think it's maintaining the momentum he has. I don't think it's at the level he did in December for the MJF program. At the same time, it's not a significantly diminished level he's at, but you know, at that point you're challenging for the champion, and now you're in a feud away from that main event scene. Wardlow and Hobbs, I think that the pressure is on for those two, not just this match, but you know, ascending to the next level, and that's certainly going to be a focus coming out of this pay-per-view for them. I think Jamie Hayter is doing really great in her role. The Guns are, you know, they're not going to be everyone's cup of tea because they're not going to be your level of some of your other tag champions, and like a program with the Guns and the Young Bucks, maybe that'd be great for them to work with those guys.
Yeah, I think there's enough material for all of these, like, you know, homegrown talents that I think they'll have more than just the chances that they're currently getting with these championships or like their featured programs. The point of featuring them right now is so that eventually they become, you know, an established level, and you get there by at least putting them on TV and putting them in significant storylines. So I don't necessarily think for any of them it's sink or swim, like, you know, to the point where like if they fail with the storyline, they'll never get a push again. I think this is part of the push. This is part of like the whole process. Win or lose, like success or fail, they are on their way.
Mark writes, an all-timer of a pay-per-view, my only minor complaint would have been swapping the positioning of the Mox Hangman match with the Wardlow Joe one to allow fans to be more alive for the TNT Championship match and not coming down from the epic Texas Death Match. It feels like for the first time since All Out, there's an absolute clean slate for story development and no worries about restructuring plans for who is there and who isn't there. While TV has been a mixed bag lately, the show in front of an all-time great, nearly 10,000 audience in San Francisco truly made this company feel hot. I usually hate Ironman matches, but they did a great job of keeping fans on the edge of their seats. A completely satisfying and exciting show.
Up next, Luke from Quebec. From a match quality and work rate standpoint, there's no denying this was an awesome show that delivered from top to bottom. The trios match and the main events were absolutely amazing. However, I don't think that should eclipse the fact that many of the stories and feuds leading up to this event were poorly built, and having only one women's match on the card in 2023 is unacceptable. Tony is lucky to have an incredibly talented locker room because the booking and creative has not been great. At a time when the competition is offering a bloodline storyline, AEW needs to step up. Curious to know if you think throwing water at a kid in the front row is going too far for a heel. That seemed to spark a big debate during the show.
Yeah, I don't think you should be going to that level in this day and age with a child. If you're MJF though, like that's a source of heat, and he's going for it. So, yeah. You know, I don't think the fallout is going to be all that significant, but I don't think you want as a company to be allowing for that type of thing, especially with kids involved.
No, I think doing anything to a child is going to be more touchy territory these days. Like I remember, like, you know, the Sasha Banks Bailey match, and where like Izzy, you know, like she got the bow taken off of her head, and I feel like we approach the line as soon as we make any sort of physical contact with the child. Like, it's one thing to taunt, it's one thing to like maybe show a cutaway of a kid crying, but doing like throwing something at a kid or taking something off their head, I think we certainly draw a line there. And
like the kid that was crying that we mentioned on SmackDown, like they brought her backstage to meet Liv Morgan afterwards just because she was crying because of the result of the match with Liv.
Yeah, but that was unprovoked. You know,
yeah, I'm just saying, like, that's the extent that they felt they had to do some make good just because a child was crying, and right. It was not even something that was incited by a performer.
You should, yeah, and then make good costs them nothing. It's like, it's good PR for them, and it's just like it's a good thing you should do. So it sounds like they've already done that. Throwing water on a child that is not expecting it, I think that crosses the line. Yeah,
and everyone's gonna have their, like, I would also say it's like, I don't think promotions typically want like performers even like tearing up a kid's sign. I would also say if you were that kid and your favorite wrestler or your least favorite wrestler tore up your sign, you're going to remember that forever. And it's probably a great story that you have. Now, getting water on you, probably not. But
So what if it was your least favorite wrestler? Like
well, I mean, they're a heel, right? And you're a little kid. It's probably not going to be a baby face that's tearing up your sign. You know what I mean?
Right. So, I mean, hopefully this kid will look back upon this with good memories. But even so, like that might not be a complete excuse for, you know, getting water thrown on you if you didn't expect it.
But if you're MJF, it's like you want this reaction, and the idea that he actually did it, it was not a plan. It's more heat on me, and I think that's what he's operating from right now. Like, look at the material he's going for in his promos at this point. Like, he's going he's going as much up to, if not skirting across the line as he can, because he does not want to be the cool heel. He does not want to have anyone.
But what happens when you actually cross the line? Like, what happens if there's a lawsuit coming off of something like this? What is that actual line that's too far?
I think that's what he's dancing with. Like in this
should
case.
you be allowing your talent to dance so freely when there's so much on the line for you as a company?
No, you shouldn't. But I also don't see AEW like suspending this guy over an action like that either. So that's the game you're playing. Let's keep going here. Luke from Quebec from a match.
I just did that.
Oh, sorry. Next one is Shane here. Live from Revolution. We were at the show. The crowd was hot the whole way through, and the building was pretty full compared to the Cow Palace shows. That sudden death portion was the most fun I've had at a wrestling show in a long time. A fun fact that Kenny's jacket he wore to the ring is from Like a Dragon Ishin, a video game he has a small appearance in. Yes, this was this blue and white jacket that he was wearing. It looked very cool, but I did not know what its significance was.
Let's go to Jay from Colorado. Roses are red, violets are blue. For the 5th time in a row, AMC forgot to order the pay-per-view. Oh no.
Oh, no.
Because they were doing this in theaters. Uh-oh. Missed out on the first 2 matches. You would think I'd learned my lesson by now.
Man.
But at least they've refunded me each time it's happened, so that's a feather in my cap. Anyways, the rest of the show was great, and the Ironman match definitely delivered. I don't think anyone went into it thinking Danielson had a chance, but they kept it interesting enough to not let it drag on at a few points. They definitely had me believing Danielson could win. Fantastic match.
Maybe that's a Fight TV order next time. 5 times in a row, I'd be like, you know what? I'm good. Hey, did you see Fight TV? They've already upped the price for Fight TV, or Fight Plus, I should say.
Oh, how much?
It's they added it's now $2 extra. I think it's like $7.99 a month now, up from $5.
Okay, so justifiable.
Dustin from Maui, the Jungle Boy Christian match was way better than I expected and might have been one of the matches of the night. Buddy Matthews' knee into Nick's 450 is the move of the night. I popped the hardest for House of Black winning, and it's time for Kenny to go back to singles and Bucks to fill the tag division again. Thanks so much. Thank you, Dustin. And yeah, that was it. I was not so worried about the match with Christian and Jungle Boy. It was the stipulation, and if that was going to override things. But man, I was pleasantly surprised, and that turned out to be really well executed.
At no point did it cross the barrier of being goofy or kind of over the top, like in a, I don't know, sports entertainment Undertaker like level. Like it just felt like, it just felt like a violent fight that ended with the closing of a casket. So yeah. Eddie from Austin says, I have 1 sentence match notes for you. Jericho and Starks, the crowd is loud. Jungle Boy Christian, wearing a sleeveless turtleneck for some reason. Call of the night. Trios Championship. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't go through everything, but awesome show. Glad I got off work in time, and I feel like it was worth my money.
All right. Muggin writes, a good pay-per-view that was elevated to great in large part by the Ironman match. Starks, Hangman, House of Black, and Jack Perry got the wins they needed to stay relevant, especially Ricky, who escaped the Jericho-verse in a much better position, and Wardlow got his image rehabbed.
We got Andrew from St. John who says, I like this show a lot. 3 of the matches were absolutely great, and almost all the rest were pretty good. Elite versus House of Black reminded me of the chemistry between the Shield and the Wyatts, and I hope there are more matches. I put my Bryan Superfan hat on and was a little deflated by the finish, but I think the storytelling was great. Mox Hangman was brutal and violent in a way that totally delivered. I loved it and see it as my match of the show. Finish reminded me of when the Hangman character was starting in ROH and New Japan and would hang people with the noose until Paige apologized for it being a little disturbing. This felt like crossing the line in a good way, but safe enough to not be truly disturbing.
Okay, I believe this is Javi. He was there live and had so much fun. To say that more than 90% of the crowd was on their feet for the sudden death is an understatement. That main event and the Texas death matches are matches that I'd personally say could be included among all of the performers' best in their careers. The pop for FTR was awesome, and I hope it came through as well as it seemed live. It sounded like an awesome crowd. The crowd had a big part in tonight's success on the show.
Brian from Chicago says, I went out to Max Wood Grilled here in Chicago, a bar that hosts all AEW pay-per-views, and what a show. The place was packed and excited from the 0 hour. Jungle Boy Christian blew the ridiculous gimmick match out the water. Texas Death Match did it perfectly. The tag title match had the bar hooting and hollering. The whole bar lost it when FDR came out. The Ironman match was beautiful storytelling, and while it ended as many suspected with MJF going over, people were sold that Danielson could go over. I especially love the quick pin moments mid-match that racked up the count. I feel a lot of excitement for multiple angles coming out of this. Omega back to singles, Jungle Boy, FTR Guns, Ricky Starks, MJF, Hangman, and more. While I felt least excited for this pay-per-view in AEW history, my goodness, did it deliver.
And the last word goes to Wolfman Handsome. Great show. Everything that needed to happen did. Sometimes we get too many old boy wins with Jericho and Cage in prominent matches, but the fresh talent came out on top and new champions were crowned. This was a big test and a big moment for MJF, and he hung with Dragon all the way through. I particularly enjoyed the moment in the match where both were on the mat with direct shots of their faces. Dragon laughing and MJF crying. A delightful storytelling visual indeed, but honestly, the real story coming out of the pay-per-view is whether or not Moxley is finally going to take that bloody vacation. Everyone's favorite fishing expedition, John Moxley's, that everyone's rooting for. I mean, if that guy who is never on Twitter, if he just made a Twitter post and he's at a lake with a rod, it would be the most popular Twitter post this year.
I think it's pretty clear matches like this are his vacation. Bleeding on national TV in one of the most violent spectacles that you'll see. Or
at the Showboat in Atlantic City for GCW. Yeah. I mean,
this is what he does to relax and unwind, and I'm very happy that he gets to experience it.
And we are glad that you experienced tonight's AEW Revolution post-show. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We are going to be back on Monday night with Rewind to Raw live at 11 Eastern here. Same channel, same place. And also, a programming note for Post Wrestling Cafe members, we will be doing a live edition of Ask Away this Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So you can either submit your questions at forum.postwrestling.com or join us live. We will be taking calls on this month's edition of the Ask Away Mailbag Show, where all questions are welcome, and you can hop on board for $6 a month at postwrestlingcafe.com. And this month, we've got multiple editions of Rewind Away coming your way, as well as a series throughout the month of March where we will be reviewing Season 5 of Drive to Survive every Thursday for Cafe members. This Thursday, we are going to be joined by one of our listeners, JC, who is going to be chatting about episodes 4 and 5, and we will also give our extensive thoughts of the race from Bahrain today and how our fantasy teams are also performing after week number 1. So that's coming out on Thursday, and of course, big week of WrestleMania coverage coming up at the end of the month. So $6 gets you in the door at postwrestlingcafe.com. And you can also join on board video.postwrestling.com to see our wonderful faces attached to all of our soothing voices. And with that, Max Verstappen is stopping by Wai's place outside, it sounds like. So we are going to sign off, but not before Wai Ting tells us the following message.
Drink water and breathe often. Bye-bye.
H2O. H2O.